Katie Carter, a fiercely ambitious marketing executive, rushing through her morning routine in her sleek apartment in downtown Chicago. Her home reflects her personality, modern, polished, and meticulously organized. Katie, dressed in a tailored navy pantsuit and clutching her PDA, multitasking when the intercom buzzes. "It's Blade," a familiar voice says through the speaker. Katie pauses. She hasn't seen Blade Hampton, her younger brother's best friend, in years. Last she heard, Blade had been living in Seattle, trying to make it as a musician. She buzzes him in, wondering what he could possibly want after all this time. When Blade steps into her apartment, he's both familiar and different. He's taller, broader, his shaggy black hair brushing his shoulders. He's dressed in a leather jacket and jeans, his guitar slung over one shoulder. His rugged appearance is a stark contrast to her corporate world, but his lopsided grin is the same as it was when he was a teenager. "I need a place to crash," Blade says, not bothering with small talk. "Just for a few weeks. I'll be out of your hair as soon as I find a spot." Katie hesitates. She doesn't have time for distractions. Her career at Drake & Mills Advertising is at a crucial juncture. Her boss has hinted at a promotion if she lands a major client. But Blade is family in a way. She finally relents. "Fine," she says. "But no parties, no loud music, and no bringing people over. Got it?" Blade smirks. "Got it, boss." Blade stepped into Katie's pristine apartment, and his boots clunked against the polished hardwood floor. He scanned the space, a spotless living room with sleek, modern furniture, a vase of fresh lilies on the table, and not a single item out of place. "Wow," he said, slinging his guitar case to the floor. "This place is very you." Katie crossed her arms, watching him with a mixture of irritation and amusement. "And what's that supposed to mean?" Blade grinned, tossing his leather jacket onto the back of the couch, an action that made Katie wince. "You're still the overachiever, huh? Everything in its place, just like high school." "I prefer organized," Katie said, moving to hang his jacket properly in the closet. "And I'd appreciate it if you respected that while you're here." "Noted," Blade replied, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "I'll try not to disrupt the sacred order." Katie rolled her eyes and gestured toward the hallway. "Guest room is down there. I have a meeting in 20 minutes, so I don't have time to play host. Make yourself at home, but remember the rules." Blade grabbed his guitar case and headed down the hallway, pausing to glance back at her. "Thanks, Katie. I mean it." She nodded curtly, then turned to walk away. But she didn't notice Blade lingering in the hallway for a moment longer, his gaze softening as he watched her. Blade is at her place. After a long day at work and the demands of her workplace, Katie didn't know to expect when she got home. Blade was in the kitchen. "Have a seat," he says. She looked at the table setting, but was lost for words. The clink of forks on plates filled the comfortable silence as Blade and Katie sat across from each other at the small dining table. The scent of garlic and herbs lingered in the air from the pasta Blade had prepared, a surprisingly delicious meal that Katie hadn't expected from someone she'd pegged as the ramen or takeout type. She took a bite. "This is actually really good," Katie admitted, twirling a forkful of spaghetti. "I didn't know you could cook." Blade grinned, leaning back in his chair. "Turns out living on your own forces you to learn a thing or two. Besides, I needed to impress my ex. She was a foodie." Katie tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "Is that why you broke up? Different priorities?" Blade's grin faltered and he shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Something like that. She wanted someone more settled, someone with a steady job, a 5-year plan. I guess my life didn't fit into her blueprint." Katie's brow furrowed as she studied him. "That must have been hard." "Yeah," Blade said, his voice softer now. 2 years is a long time to share your life with someone, only to realize you're not enough for them." The vulnerability in his tone caught Katie off guard. She wasn't used to seeing this side of Blade, the side that wasn't hiding behind charm and sarcasm. "Hey," she said, her voice gentle. "For what it's worth, I don't think it's about being enough. Sometimes people just want different things." Blade looked up at her, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. "Thanks. I guess I'm still figuring out what I want, too." The following days passed in a rhythm of quiet tension and growing understanding. Blade spent his afternoons strumming his guitar on Katie's balcony, the melodies drifting into her home office and occasionally distracting her from her work. Katie found herself listening more closely than she wanted to admit, her mind lingering on the haunting, beautiful sounds. One evening, as Katie sat at her laptop reviewing presentation slides, Blade wandered into the kitchen. He rummaged through the fridge, then leaned against the counter, watching her. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "you work harder than anyone I've ever met." "That's how you get ahead," Katie replied, not looking up. "Hard work pays off." "Sure," Blade said, "but at what cost?" Katie finally glanced at him, her brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Blade shrugged, opening a soda. "I mean, when was the last time you did something just because you wanted to? Not because it checked a box or moved you closer to a goal, but because it made you happy." Katie blinked, caught off guard. She opened her mouth to reply, but realized she didn't have an answer. She hadn't stopped to think about happiness in years. Everything was about the next milestone, the next achievement. "Exactly," Blade said, smirking as if he'd proven his point. "You should try it sometime. Might surprise you." Katie rolled her eyes, but she couldn't shake his words. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she found herself wondering when she'd stop doing things for fun. The thought left her uneasy. One night, Katie couldn't sleep. The glow of the city lights seeped through her curtains as she tossed and turned. Finally, she gave up and wandered into the living room, expecting it to be empty. Instead, she found Blade sitting on the couch, his guitar resting on his lap. "You're up late," Katie said, her voice soft. "Couldn't sleep?" Blade replied. "Music helps." She sat down in the armchair across from him, curling her legs beneath her. "What are you working on?" "Just messing around," he said, strumming a quiet melody. After a moment, he added, "It's something personal." Katie tilted her head. "Personal how?" Blade hesitated, then sighed. "It's about figuring out where you stand with someone. You know, that weird space between what you feel and what you're afraid to admit." Katie's chest tightened, her pulse quickening. Yet she wasn't sure if it was the late hour, the quiet intimacy of the moment, or the way Blade's gaze lingered on her as he spoke, but something about his words struck a chord. "Sounds complicated," she said finally. Blade chuckled, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Isn't it always?" They sat in silence for a while, the gentle strumming of his guitar filling the space between them. Katie felt a strange sense of calm, a reprieve from the constant pressure of her life. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about deadlines or promotions, just the quiet connection between them. As Blade played, Katie's mind wandered back to their teenage years. She remembered the goofy, carefree boy who used to raid her family's fridge and tease her relentlessly. He'd grown into someone more complex, someone who seemed to carry the weight of his dreams and failures in equal measure. When he finished playing, Blade glanced up at her. "What do you think?" Katie smiled. "I think it's beautiful." "Thanks," he said, his voice quiet. "It means a lot." For a moment, their eyes met, and Katie felt something shift. It was subtle, but undeniable. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew one thing. Her carefully controlled world had just become a little more complicated. As the days pass, Blade struggles with his feelings. His old crush concerning Katie resurfaces, but it's tangled with the pain of his recent breakup. Katie, on the other hand, finds herself drawn to Blade's easygoing nature, a stark contrast to the high-stakes, cutthroat environment of her job. One night, Katie came home late to find Blade playing his guitar in the dimly lit living room. She pauses, listening to the haunting melody. Blade notices her and stops abruptly. "Sorry, hope my music don't keep you up," he mutters. "It's beautiful," Katie says, sitting on the armrest of the couch. "What's it about?" Blade hesitates. "Someone who makes everything complicated, but also makes it worth it." Katie smiles, not realizing the song is about her. "Keep playing," she says softly. Blade hesitated for a moment, his fingers hovering over the strings of his guitar. Then, with a deep breath, he began to play again. The melody was soft and achingly tender, filling the dimly lit living room like a quiet confession. Katie sat still, her head tilted slightly as she listened, her eyes fixed on Blade. The song was raw, unpolished, and deeply personal. The lyrics, when they came, were murmured more than sung, as if Blade wasn't sure he wanted her to hear them fully. Katie's smile softened as she listened, though she didn't grasp the full weight of the words. To her, it was a beautiful song about someone Blade cared for, perhaps a fragment of his recent heartbreak. To Blade, it was a release, a way to say the things he couldn't bring himself to speak aloud. When he finished, the last note lingering in the air, Katie clapped softly. "That was incredible," she said. "Whoever she is, she's lucky to have inspired that wonderful song." Blade gave a tight smile, his gaze falling to the floor. "Yeah, something like that." Katie's phone buzzed, pulling her attention away. She glanced at the screen and sighed. "I should get to bed. I have an early meeting tomorrow." Blade nodded, his fingers still resting lightly on the guitar strings. "Good night, Kate." "Good night, Blade," she said, standing and heading toward her room. Katie couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as the melody of Blade's song replayed in her mind. There was something about it that felt personal. The way he had played, the way his voice had carried the words, it lingered in a way she didn't fully understand. For the first time, she found herself wondering if she had misread Blade entirely. Meanwhile, Blade sat in the living room, staring at the guitar in his lap. Playing the song for Katie had been both cathartic and agonizing. She hadn't realized it was about her, and part of him was relieved. The other part, his heart, felt like it was caught in a vice. He thought about his ex, the relationship that had crumbled under the weight of unmet expectations and differing life paths. But as painful as that breakup had been, it didn't hold a candle to the emotions swirling around Katie. She was everything he'd admired and wanted growing up, and now that he was here in her world, those feelings were impossible to ignore. "Get a grip, you're not a teenager anymore," he muttered to himself, setting the guitar aside. A few days later, Katie surprised Blade by suggesting they go out for dinner. "You've been cooped up here," she said, adjusting the strap of her purse. "And honestly, we both need to take a break." Blade raised an eyebrow, a teasing grin spreading across his face. Did the workaholic just admit she needs a break? Wait, alert the media. "Don't push your luck," she shot back, though her tone was light. They found themselves at a cozy Italian restaurant not far from Katie's apartment. The soft glow of candles on the tables and the warm hum of conversation created a relaxed atmosphere that felt worlds away from Katie's usual high-pressure environment. Blade ordered wine for them, and they settled into an easy rhythm of conversation. As the evening went on, the topics grew deeper. Katie shared stories from her childhood, moments of vulnerability she rarely let surface. Blade listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering his own tales in return. At one point, Katie rested her chin on her hand and smiled at him. "You're easy to talk to, you know that?" Blade chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," she said. "I don't let people in very often. Too much risk, you know?" Blade's gaze softened. "I get it, but sometimes the risk is worth it." The walk home was quiet but comfortable. The cool night air carried the faint scent of rain, and the city lights reflected off the damp pavement. As they reached Katie's building, Blade hesitated. "Thanks for tonight," he said. "I needed that." "So did I," Katie admitted, her voice sincere. They stood there for a moment, neither of them moving to unlock the door. Blade's heart raced as he debated whether to say what he'd been holding back for weeks. Finally, he took a breath. "Katie," he began, his voice hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you." She looked up at him, her expression curious. "What is it?" Blade hesitated, the words catching in his throat, but the thought of staying silent felt worse than the fear of rejection. "That song I played the other night," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't just about someone, it was about you." Katie froze, her breath catching. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the city faded into the background as she processed his words. "Me?" she finally asked, her voice soft. Blade nodded. "I felt this way for a long time, since we were kids really, but being here, seeing you now, it's just made it harder to ignore." Katie didn't know how to respond. Her mind was a whirlwind of emotions, surprise, confusion, and something she wasn't ready to name. She began, but her voice trailed off. "It's okay," Blade said quickly, stepping back. "You don't need to say anything. I wanted you to know." Katie nodded slowly, her heart pounding as she unlocked the door. They stepped inside in silence, the weight of the confession hanging between them. As Katie lay woke in her bed, her thoughts refused to settle. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt the stirring of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. possibility. Blade spends the next few days pouring his emotions into the song, his conflicted feelings about Katie spilling onto the page. The lyrics speak of admiration, longing, and the fear of ruining a good thing. It's raw, honest, and unfiltered, everything he can't say to her face. One evening, Blade invites Katie to a small open mic night where he was performing. She agrees, eager to support him. The intimate cafe is filled with candlelight and a mix of aspiring artists. Katie sits near the stage, her tailored blazer feeling out of place among the bohemian crowd. When Blade takes the stage, Katie feels a strange sense of pride. He looks confident, his guitar slung low, his voice rich and soulful. As he starts to play, she realizes the song is about her. The room falls into silence as Blade pours his heart into this performance. Katie's chest tightens as the lyrics hit home. She suddenly sees Blade not as her brother's best friend or a struggling musician, but as a man who's been carrying feelings for her for years. As Blade strummed the final chord, the room erupted into applause, breaking the heavy silence that had hung over the performance. Katie clapped along with the crowd, though her hands trembled slightly. Her heart pounded as she watched Blade step off the stage, his gaze scanning the room until it landed on her. He smiled. A small, nervous smile that sent a wave of warmth and anxiety through her all at once. Katie stood as he approached, unsure of what to say. The vulnerability in the song had struck her deeply, and she couldn't ignore the way it had been written, how the words felt like they were meant for her. "So," Blade said, his voice tentative, "what did you think?" "It was beautiful," Katie said, her voice soft but earnest. "The lyrics, the way you sung it, it felt so personal and amazing." Blade rubbed the back of his neck, his signature grin absent for once. "That's because it came from the heart." Her breath caught. The cafe buzzed around them, but everything else faded into the background. "It was about me, wasn't it?" Blade nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Yes, it was." Katie looked down, her emotions swirling in a way she hadn't expected. She thought of all the moments they'd shared in the past few weeks, and the way he had made her laugh, the quiet support he had offered, the undeniable connection between them. But she also thought about the complications, the risks, and her carefully structured life that Blade didn't seem to fit into. "Blade, I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. "You don't have to say anything," he said quickly. I couldn't keep it in anymore. I know it's complicated, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to let you know." She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "It's not that I don't feel something," she said carefully. "It's just, this is all so unexpected. You're my brother's best friend. You're you." Blade chuckled softly, though there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Yeah, I know, I'm me. Not exactly what you pictured as a boyfriend, huh?" "That's not what I meant," she said quickly. "You are incredible, Blade. You are talented and kind, and you have been here for me, in ways I didn't even know I needed. But this, it scares me." "Why?" he asked, his voice gentle but insistent. "Because I don't want to ruin what we have," she said, her eyes glistening. "You've become important to me, and if this doesn't work out, if we hurt each other, I don't know if I could handle that." Blade reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "Katie, I can't promise it will be perfect. I can't promise we won't mess up. But I know I would rather try and risk getting it wrong than never try at all." Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. She wasn't used to someone being so open, so willing to take a leap where she hesitated. Her logical mind screamed at her to back away, to protect herself. But her heart was leaning toward him, drawn to the vulnerability he offered so freely. "I need time," she finally said, her voice barely audible. Blade nodded, his expression softening. "Take all the time you need. I will wait." The cool night air wrapped around them as they left the cafe. Blade had offered to walk her home, the silence between them now comfortable but charged with unspoken words. The city lights reflected off the damp pavement, and the sounds of cars and distant laughter filled the air. "You didn't have to wait until an open mic night to tell me, Katie said, breaking the silence. There was a teasing lilt to her voice, though it was undercut with genuine curiosity. Blade smiled, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. "Yeah, but music's how I say the things I'm too scared to say out loud." Besides, I figured if you hated it, at least the rest of the audience might like the song. Katie laughed softly, shaking her head. You're impossible. And you're impossible not to write songs about, he countered, his grin returning. She rolled her eyes, but her heart swelled at his words. Blade's ability to disarm her with humor and sincerity was something she hadn't experienced before. It terrified her and thrilled her at the same time. When they reached her building, Katie paused at the door. Blade stood beside her, the weight of their earlier conversation hanging between them. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Blade, she said finally, her voice hesitant but steady, I don't know where this will go. I don't even know if I'm ready for whatever this is. I know, he said, and I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I just want you to know how I feel. In time we will figure it out. She nodded, her lips curling into a faint smile. Thank you. For being honest? For everything. Blade stepped closer, his eyes meeting hers. For you, Katie? Always. As she unlocked the door and stepped inside, Katie glanced back at him as she walks to her bedroom. Good night, Blade. Good night, Katie, sweet dreams, he said in a warm voice. As she closed the door behind her, Katie leaned against it, her heart racing. Blade's song echoed in her mind, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel something beyond fear and control. Maybe, just maybe, some risks were worth taking. Despite the growing closeness, their differences occasionally surfaced in ways they couldn't ignore. Katie's structured, goal-oriented life sometimes clashed with Blade's free-spirited approach, and they both struggled to find a balance. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Katie came home to find Blade sprawled on the couch, his guitar propped against the armrest. The sight that once comforted her now sparked frustration. Do you ever stop to think about what's next? She asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Blade looked up, startled. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, don't you want more stability? A real plan? Katie said, dropping her bag onto the counter. You can't just live gig to gig forever. Blade sat up, his brow furrowing. And what's wrong with living in the moment? Not everyone's life has to be planned down to the last detail. That's not what I meant, Katie said, sighing. It's just, I want to know that we're moving towards something. Blade stood, his voice calm but firm. But we are. Just because my path doesn't look like yours doesn't mean it's not valid. The tension hung in the air, and Katie felt a pang of guilt. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to sound like I don't believe in you. I really do. It's that. I'm scared, Blade. Scared of this not working. Blade stepped closer, his expression softening. Katie, I'm scared too, but we're not going to figure it all out tonight. All I know is I want this to work. I want us to work. Katie nodded, her shoulders relaxing. Me too. A week later, Blade surprised Katie with a performance at a private event her company hosted. It was a casual gathering for clients, and Katie had convinced her boss to let Blade provide the entertainment. She hadn't expected him to play that song. As Blade sang, the room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them. Katie felt the same pull she had felt that night at the cafe, but this time, there was no fear, only a deep, unshakable connection. When the song ended, Blade looked directly at her, his eyes saying what words couldn't. Later, as they walked home, Katie slipped her hand into his. You were amazing tonight. Blade squeezed her hand, his smile soft. You make me want to be more than what I am. Over time, Katie and Blade learned to complement each other's worlds. Katie's structure gave Blade direction, while Blade's spontaneity reminded Katie to embrace life's unpredictability. They weren't perfect, and there were moments of doubt and disagreement, but they always returned to the foundation they'd built on honesty and mutual respect. One evening, as they sat on Katie's balcony overlooking the city, Blade strummed his guitar, humming a new melody. Katie leaned against his shoulder, a glass of wine in her hand. You know, she said, I never thought this would work. Blade chuckled. And now? Now, Katie said, smiling. I can't imagine it any other way. Blade kissed the top of her head, his guitar resting forgotten beside them. The city lights twinkled in the distance, a reminder that while the future remained uncertain, they were exactly where they needed to be. As their relationship deepened, they began to push each other in ways neither of them had anticipated. Katie encouraged Blade to think bigger with his music, helping him research venues and contacts for a potential tour. Her sharp organizational skills became an asset to his creative chaos, and together, they mapped out a plan that felt both ambitious and achievable. In the span of a few months, they both reached pivotal moments in their respective journeys. Blade booked a small regional tour, securing gigs in several cities. Katie helped him organize the logistics, and though the thought of him leaving for weeks at a time made her anxious, she knew it was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. "You are going to be amazing," she told him the night before his first show. They were sitting on her couch, Blade's guitar propped up nearby. "Don't forget to call me after every performance." Blade laughed, pulling her into a hug. "You might regret that. I am a talker, and I will listen," Katie said, smiling against his chest. Meanwhile, Katie had her own triumph to celebrate. Her hard work had paid off, and she was promoted to lead a major account. When she shared the news with Blade, he lifted her off the ground in a joyous hug. "I am so proud of you," he said, his eyes shining with genuine pride. "You have worked so hard for this." "It's not just me," Katie admitted. "You have helped me see things differently. You have made me better." The night before Blade's tour began, they sat together on Katie's balcony, the city lights stretching out before them. A bottle of wine sat between them, the glasses mostly untouched. Blade held his guitar, idly strumming a soft tune. "I'm going to miss this," Katie said, her voice tinged with both sadness and contentment. "Me too," Blade replied. "But this isn't the end. It's just the beginning." Katie leaned her head on his shoulder, letting the music and the city's hum fill the silence. For the first time, the uncertainty of the future didn't scare her. She knew it wouldn't always be easy, but she also knew they would find their way together. As the night deepened, they sat there, their hands intertwined, their dreams within reach. Their story was unwritten, but it was filled with promise, a melody they would compose one step at a time. The end. If you enjoyed this love story by Green Tea Tales, please like and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.